No, good afternoon. My name is Mike Bursell. I am the Executive Director of the Confidential Computing Consortium, although this talk isn't really particularly about confidential computing. Now, of course, you can use confidential computing for everything, but this is much more broad than that. I really want this to be a dialogue. I've got a whole bunch of slides which I'll try and get through, but if you have questions, let's kind of do it as we go. So I like tea because I'm British. I even have a tea bag in my pocket at the moment, just in case you need to know that. LinkedIn, you'll find me. I have a blog, and I'm the author of this book. I wrote this book because I was annoyed because people kept talking about trust, and we don't really have any real definitional framework about which to talk about trust. And so I wrote a book about trust, and part of that is about trust in open source. And that's kind of what led me to this. This is the abstract. You should have read this. If you haven't read this, read it in the shed. Sked, whatever. So this is what I plan to talk about. First of all, a quick description of the problem as I see it, talk about some of the existing approaches, then look into some insights from research, and then suggest a few next steps. But first, I wanted to add this, because I saw this just a couple of days ago, and we've all seen the XZ, or XZ as I like to think of it, and OpenJS stuff. But this is a slightly different approach where it looks like somebody is being targeted to discredit them. There's more details in the thing. I won't read out all of this, but if you do want to follow, these slides are also on Sked or Shed, so feel free to have a look at them there. But I kind of thought using this to discredit a person rather than compromise a project, which is what seems to have happened, was kind of an interesting approach. So first of all, what is the big deal? And I think most of us, know these issues. Many open source projects are understaffed. There are absolutely opportunities for the bad folks to do bad things, and not many checks in place for them. And there are opportunities to become maintainers. We've seen that as well. There are lots of dependencies all over the place, and it's not always easy to spot which dependencies could introduce vulnerabilities. One of the things about XZ, I'll try and say XZ, is that it's not the obvious place that you would attack things, which is why it's quite a clever place to go. And identity, which is what we tend to use when we're looking at contributors and maintainers, is actually kind of fluid, often only semi-affiliated. So I bet most of the people in this room have a GitHub account, and I bet most of those who do don't have their company email associated with it, or any description in their profile about the company they're at, or the companies they've been at, or the nation of which they're part, or any intelligence services for which they're currently working. Don't put your hand up, I just don't want to know. And the other thing is that as a community, we default to trusting. This is generally a good thing, but it does cause us some problems. So this isn't a technical problem. That's the first thing we need to understand. It's a people problem and a technical problem, right? And so my background is I did English literature and theology at university, picked up an MBA later on, was a software engineer, was a bad software engineer, became a product manager, security architect, CEO. I've done all the bits and pieces, but the point is that I like to think about things as not just technical problems, and that's what I hope that we can start looking at here. So this is an interesting quote I came across from, I think Rachel Botsman was one of the founders of Mumsnet. Any members? That is disappointing. But she's talking here about experience and blind faith. And she's basically appealing to reputation. And reputation is not going to be enough here. And part of the reason is that people play the long game, where individuals and organizations, they do the right thing for a while in order to be able to do the wrong thing later on. And we know this from people like spies, but also stalkers, people who target children, all those sorts of people do this, and it's a very productive behavior because we tend to default to trusting as people. And I would note that I wrote this, well, I probably wrote this about 2 years before then, it was published well before the XZ stuff, right? So I'm not the only person. We've been talking about this for a while, and it's kind of scary and bad that it's turned up. So the first thing, we might think about is, well, let's do game theory stuff. As techies, we love game theory, right? I love game theory, and it's really helpful for lots of stuff, but I'm not sure how often it's useful here. Partly because game theory works best when you have multiple repeated games, and where you have a clear reward-punishment tuple. And this is rarely the case in what we're talking about here. And then there's kind of this question about, does banning Russians help or hinder? Now, I know that the Linux Foundation being who they are, and Linus Torvalds being who he is, and us being who we are, it probably had to happen, the banning of these Russian folks. But what has it done in terms of how we think about trust and maintainers? I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think we're yet to find out. So I'm really raising it as a question. This is in my mind what PGP signing parties. Not really. Okay, I've been to at least one, but they're really not the problem, right? Because sorry, not the answer. They're not the problem either, but they're not the answer. The problem is that context is lost. Typically, what a PGP signing party looked like was, I've met him before and he's a mate of mine, and therefore I'm going to say, I'm going to sign his key, right? And what does that mean? It means that something is, that's a transitive trust relationship, but it doesn't really say much more than that. And if I say, for instance, that I say to Gordon, should I trust Clifford to write good embedded C++ code? Gordon's nodding, okay, because he knows Clifford, and he says yes. But even if Gordon has seen Clifford's C++ embedded C++ code, that doesn't necessarily mean that Gordon's a good person to be giving these recommendations. He may not be a very good recommender. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. I'm sorry to pick on you two guys, but it was very, very easy. So despite that, I think one of the things we're going to have to be aware of is that face-to-face personal encounters may have to be part of our response to how we deal with this. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but it's very difficult if we don't. Partly because of the pseudonymization thing, but it's really difficult. So let's talk a bit about some of the existing approaches. So, the first thing I should say is I'm a fan of all of these approaches, right? We're beginning to see a lot more dependency analysis with things like S-bombs. What are the different things that these depend on? They tend to be solely on the code side rather than on people side or infrastructure side and stuff, but we can manage that. I'm also a big fan of sort of cross-project contribution mapping, community analysis. This is something that's happening a bit at the moment. I've tried to find some links and done a very, very bad job here, but there's a link to OpenRank, I think, there, which I think is a Japanese effort to look at how different contributors contribute to different projects. And I think actually there's a lot to be done here, and we should be doing more of this and should have done it earlier. And of course, there's things like Chaos, which gives you some sort of view of how healthy a community is in terms of the number of committers and how much they're committing, and some other useful things like that. Oh, and commit signing, because if we don't do commit signing, we have no idea and no way of tracking stuff. So I think we have to do those. So I want to step back and go back to context a bit. So my question here is, what does a maintainer do? So here's my hypothetical example. You have a security-relevant library with some crypto protocol implementations. I chose this one because it's just the most horrible pathological example I can think of, okay? And a maintainer is clearly juggling stuff, right, okay? So here's some of the things that a maintainer might be looking at, right? They're going to look at the test coverage of the code, if you're lucky. They might be looking at the correctness of the protocol implementation. We've got some cryptographic protocols in here, TLS maybe. Has that been done correctly? They might be looking at the correctness of the test coverage of the implementation, which is a completely different thing to the first one, right? Are we checking that the key generation is done? Not even that, I suppose. Are we checking that some of the man-in-the-middle attacks are looked at? They may be checking for backdoors. I can't hope that a maintainer would be doing that. And checking for the provenance of patches. These are all sensible things to be doing, right? Also, they should be checking, you would hope, that the build environment is trusted, that there are no compiler backdoors, that they have reproducibility of all the builds, and maybe that the protocol is actually a good protocol, right? Maybe they should be looking at signing key management, there's no way that most human beings, particularly people without huge depth of knowledge, are going to be able to do all of these things right. We're now juggling fire stuff, and the problem is that when we take a signed SBOM or some code or just something and say we trust it, we're basically saying we trust that all of these things have happened, typically by a single maintainer, or maybe if you're lucky, 2 or 3 people but we want all of these things. So whatever else we do, we need to track all this sort of stuff. And in toto tries, as an example, right? But just saying, I've signed this, it's great, is not and never has been enough. And breathe. Sorry. Because that's what you get. You just get the world on fire. Okay. I have some chips on my shoulders that will be appearing. I already probably have one. So here are some of the non-technical approaches that we have. So, first of all, we have the maintainer as dictator, hopefully benevolent dictator, possibly not for life. I don't know if you saw the picture of the penguin in the coffin that Jim showed. It's a bit harsh, poor Linus. But we should be looking at co-maintainers anyway for a whole bunch of other reasons. Succession planning, but also these extra hands, extra skills. And if you think about projects with co-maintainers, how many times are those co-maintainers actually picked because they have complementary skills? Or how many of them are picked because actually they know the same sorts of things as the main maintainer or are mates or work for the same organization? These are not necessarily bad things, but we should be thinking about this broader complementarity. Yes, foundations should be funding this stuff. I've yet to go to a talk, certainly today, which hasn't mentioned that, but yes, absolutely. And folks like the OpenSSF, wave your hand if you're from the OpenSSF. That's one. Where is Crobe? I'll tell him off later. Doing this is good. But so, commercial and distro funding, we do these as well. Hackathons are good, particularly if you get face-to-face meetings out of them. And this worries me a lot, actually, that face-to-face meetings do have possible discriminatory or at least non-inclusive overtones or possible problems. If you don't have money to go, if you have family commitments, typically more women, people from lower incomes have more family commitments. If you are neurodiverse and have problems with crowds or meeting people or interacting face-to-face, these are people who we are going to struggle, should we say, to get to as many face-to-face meetings as we want. And we absolutely have to have a huge diversity of people in security. Because the attackers are diverse, that means we need to be diverse. And I'm a white, middle-aged, English-speaking, all the obvious tick boxes, a guy saying this, but I really believe it. And it's disability, all of those things, different ways of thinking we have to have. So we need to work out what to do about this. So just a few insights from research before I really do want to turn this into stuff. So who here has heard of Dunbar's number? More than I feared. That's fantastic. So Dunbar's number is basically if you are forming a small community like a Neanderthal village or a church or a group of soldiers, then Dunbar's number is a good place to start. It's maybe 120 to 200 people. And it's basically all the people who can hold the same set of values, kind of, together and work together on it. And I also like this as a description of the number of people you wouldn't feel embarrassed about. Not all in one place, right? But this is, if you saw someone at a bar, you wouldn't feel worried about joining them uninvited and saying, hi, nice to see you, right? So I guess probably about half of my Dunbar's number are here, not necessarily in this room, but at this conference at the moment. There's also been some great work by people like Fukuyama and O'Neill on trust in organizations, if you're interested in delving into that sort of thing, and work on open source collaboration, but very few look at trust. There's some great works on how to build a community, but not about how to manage trust relationships within that very much. My book does have some stuff on that if you're interested. In terms of insights from research, there seems to be very little recent sociological research in this area, and I think this is something we need to change. And most of them are focused on social networks, unsurprisingly. You know, how do people on Twitter work with each other? How do they build trust? How do they cease to trust people? How do you get islands in the stream of people who lots of people trust and those sorts of things? But here are some examples of things that I thought were an interesting start. This is some work about trust dimensions. Here are some of the things you might choose to decide to trust someone on their ability, on benevolence shown. I'm not quite sure how you measure that, but it makes sense, right? And on their integrity or perceived integrity. And the second, and certainly the third, are ones that you can fake. More difficult to fake the first one, although in these days of AI, who knows? And then about how do you repair things? Now, I don't know how often we need to worry about that. Maybe a project and a community needs to rebuild trust in itself, but if you found a bad apple, a bad actor, you probably want to throw them out. But maybe there are times people just mess up, right? It's not malevolent, it's not intentional, so you need to worry about those sorts of things. Then a little bit about game theory. You know, I did say I do like game theory. I thought this was useful because actually there's a number of useful trust models. Particularly, they bring out trust in cryptography, which is, I think, fair to say, a very particular type of trust, and how you build it is very specific as well. And also some of these mechanisms for building trust, and how many of these can we use, and how many of them are appropriate for these use cases that we want to do? And I just don't know. And the last one is, it's got a great TCD-ABCF. A trust-based community detection using artificial bee colony, which is a lot more cool and actually a lot more interesting than you might think. And the thing here is about finding influential and reliable people and using them as these kind of islands in the stream. And I think this is somewhere where there is stuff we can do, because there are people in this community who many of us trust and who know each other. We can all name one or two probably who we've met at this conference, or we've known before, we've worked in at different jobs and companies, and we have good trust in, and we do feel act as sort of chaotic attractors almost in some ways. Some of them very much so, but I'm not going to name names. So very briefly, kind of to finish off, what next steps are there? Well, firstly, we need to learn from cybersecurity. What are the attacks that might happen? And what's the benefit to the attackers? What are the attacker models? Who are they doing? What are they doing it for? Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it isn't. But if you can say, well, nation states are likely to go after these things because they allow them to do these types of things, as opposed to a script kiddie, you're going to put different types of monitoring, mitigation, and processes in place. I think there's more work we could do around Dunbar, probably, and definitely we need to do quite a lot of work around identity. And I think that some of the self-sovereign identity models that we're seeing from Web3 show some promise here too. I do think we need more face-to-face work. I'd like to see research into the adequacy of video calls for building trust, particularly given the problems we're seeing with deep fakes. And then we've got questions like who pays for travel, and the impact of preferred interaction models. That's, I'm talking some people prefer interacting in different ways. Because possibly slightly more on the spectrum, I don't look at people directly when I'm speaking to them most of the time. I look to the side, and that makes difficult for some people to interact, and I know that. And then this whole analysis of people, of their affiliations, their contributions, their expertise, remember that is something that we really need to look at. And last of all, we just need more research. And that's what I want to encourage you to go out and talk to your companies, talk to your foundations you're part of. I'd love to do some of this stuff. I find it very interesting. But we need to work together as a community to make that happen. So we've got a few minutes. I'm going to stop there. That was indeed my last slide. So questions, please. Thank you. I'm recording this, and we'll probably put it up on the Confidential Computing Consortium website. I'll repeat questions. Gordon.
Mike, can you talk a little more about the benefits of face-to-face? I mean, I think we can intuitively imagine some of those benefits, but also you obviously have spies that fool people physically,
sure.
Verbally.
So can I talk a little more about the benefits of face-to-face meetings? Yes, and as Gordon points out, there are people who are very good at deceiving in face-to-face situations. I think the first thing to say is that it's more difficult to deceive generally in face-to-face situations. I think the group dynamics give more opportunities for people to establish trust as well. And most of these meetings will be face-to-face, and then we need to think about that. There's quite a lot of work on this, not something that I've looked into particularly for this meeting, for this set of slides, but I think it's a good point. We should look into the research and how that works. Not an area that I've delved into particularly, I'm sorry. Any other questions? Please.
Can you speak a little bit more to what the Confidential Computing Consortium's work is and what the goals are?
Absolutely. Yeah, so what does the Confidential Computing Consortium do? Very briefly, we are an LF project. I like to say a little like the CNCF, only a lot smaller, in that we are pushing the adoption of confidential computing, which is the protection of data in use by tested hardware-based TEEs. Basically, it allows you to run applications on machines you don't trust using capabilities in chips. That's GPUs and CPUs. So basically, the typical thing is you are encrypting a set of memory pages and then doing a measurement of that by the chip, and which gives you a cryptographic measurement which you can then attest remotely off the machine. So it allows you to know that your everything is protected, even from kernel, hypervisor, admin, anything in the stack, and is protected by the chip. So this isn't really particularly to do with the CCC. I happen to be the exec director of the CCC as well. Clifford.
Going back a few slides about like the maintainers list of all the different types of roles they do in. That's a lot of things what humans do. Do you see particular projects that help reduce the overhead, like projects or tools that actually make this role easier? What
projects or tools are there to make this role easier? I don't know. That's a really, really good question. I mentioned In-Toto. In-Toto is helps you build SBOMs and stuff by allowing you to be quite explicit about what you're doing with a signature, because signatures should say one thing. They should be about one context and one context only. If you have more than one context, it should be a separate signature or a separate thing on the signature list. It's a basic thing about signatures, and they are horribly misused in almost all situations, including S-bombs. People are thinking about it and doing stuff. In terms of broader capability, in terms of broader things, I don't know of any tools and things. Are there general tools? I'm not sure. Specific tools for different bits of this, build environment. Yes, for instance, there are tools to help you work on having consistent build environment and reproducibility. So, things like NixOS are certainly good tools for those sorts of things. But I don't think we have a general set of tools. Next.
Yeah, an observation I would make here on the maintainer slide is this wouldn't be that bad if the maintainer had help, but very often the maintainer becomes a solo person doing all of that, and they can't rely on code reviewers who might be senior trusted members of the community that the maintainer may have known for a decade. This is where the Dunbar numbers comes in handy, because you can offload this to a team, and then it's not nearly as bad, right? What happened with the XZ case was it was a solo maintainer who was getting overloaded because they weren't getting paid to do it, and so they were trying to hold it down without even it being their full-time job. But I think I'm going to be giving a talk tomorrow about code contributions, because I'm trying to attack this from a slightly different angle, which is a lot of companies pay engineers to show up and drop a whole bunch of code for a new feature that the company wants. Yep. But the maintainer knows that as soon as they accept the feature, those engineers disappear, never to be seen again.
Let me just,
but I think this is part of that, which is if the maintainer had help, this would not nearly be as bad.
Just to summarize Theodore's point, that this becomes better if you have help as a maintainer, and trusted help. Specifically, there are occasions where companies pay for features to be created, the code is created, patches put in, dumped, and there's nothing happens afterwards. There's no maintenance and nothing beyond that, which is difficult. So Theodore has a talk about this tomorrow, which we should probably go all to. Yuval?
So my question is, let's say there's someone very trusted, like Linus Torvalds, but I get his computer.
You trust Linus? Okay, Karen.
And I get his laptop and I sign for him. So someone very trusted could produce bad content, and maybe someone from North Korea wrote great code and committed it to get like the XZ to get into. So maybe we only care about the content and we don't care about the specific trust.
So Yuval's noting that if you can get hold of signing keys, basically, the game is pretty much over, and I 100% agree. And it's one of the use cases actually for confidential computing, because if you're doing your signing in trusted execution environments, even if that machine is compromised, you still have some level of you can have some level of trust in the signing process. So there are broader, just general cybersecurity capability knowledge that should be in place and used, and processes absolutely beyond that. Yes, I think it's going to have to be the last question. I think Emma.
I just actually had suggested looking at the chaos metric for inclusive leadership. It sometimes gets buried, but it has a lot of these attributes of looking beyond the usual faces, and there's tactics. So it's been around for quite a few years now, but maybe needs to be reborn as trusted leadership, but definitely something maybe to add to the chaos link there around community.
Thank you. Emma's noting that there's actually a metric under the chaos framework, which is inclusive leadership, and saying that maybe it should be used more, and maybe we should expand it a bit more as well. If you have any more questions, please get in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm here, all those sorts of things. So thank you very much indeed for your time.